Thank you very much for coming. It's always an honor to speak on behalf of Nikon. I have to tell you that Iceland is probably one of my favorite places on the planet. My 7th trip, lucky number 7. Yeah, I'm going to start off. I'm a photographer and filmmaker. Grew up in the mountains of Colorado. We have a lot of 13 to 14,000 foot peaks. And I'm going to show you initially a short video that's going to give you an idea of what my office can look like. So it's a really exciting time to be a photographer and filmmaker. The technological advances that we've all grown accustomed to have really pushed the envelope on what we're able to do with a DSLR camera. Like Peter said, my first camera was a Nikon FM2 with a Nikkor 50 millimeter 1.4 lens that my mom gave me. I started in the darkroom shooting black and white, and my sort of foray into the journalism world was, I grew up wanting to be the family photographer, but I didn't really see it as a career. My dad was a fly fishing guide, and growing up in the mountains of western Colorado, he would take me on his adventures, and he had this really sort of twisted idea that the worse the weather was, the colder, the wetter, the more miserable the weather, the better the fishing would be. So I can thank him a lot for a lot of my ability to be able to photograph in a lot of cold places. I started out photographing what I know, and that was outdoor sports, backcountry skiing, ice climbing, and really building my portfolio, seeking out clients that I could sell these images to. After university, I moved to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and really put in a concerted effort to build my brand, to build that portfolio, specifically for companies like Patagonia, North Face, K2 Skis, et cetera, and really just honing in, trying to learn the nuances of those sports and understand what makes a good picture great. A lot of times that's going out when there is nobody out shooting, Miserable, cold day, lots of snow, finding one little splash of color, and making something unique and something different. This image really sort of changed my perspective on photography. This image was taken with a Nikon D3. And this was the first camera that had been produced that you could shoot at a very high ISO. And this image would not have been possible before this generation of camera. To get this sunburst here, right in the middle, this is shot with a Nikon 16mm fisheye lens. To get this sunburst, you need to be at f/16, so a very small aperture. Lets in very little light. But to freeze the skier here, we need to be at 25/100th of a second or faster, so a very, very fast shutter speed. ISO 5000 is needed to get to this point. And before this couldn't have happened. So this really opened up my mind. I could shoot after sunset. I could start shooting these kinds of pictures. And really, it helped me sort of use technology to benefit my photography. But it doesn't snow year-round in Colorado or Wyoming, so I needed a second season. And for me, that second season was kayaking. A friend said, "Do you kayak?" And I said, "No, but I can bushwhack. I'm pretty dogged. I can get to any position, and I will make some interesting pictures." So I fell in love with kayaking. Started using many, many frames, making composites like this. My son's a 5-year-old. He asks the most interesting questions, such as, "How'd you get them all to go down at the same time, Dad?" And I said, "Well, that's the same guy." He goes, "I know." But, so this is a real simple composite technique done in Photoshop, but this is to show where he actually traveled. Red Bull's a client of mine, and every assignment I do for Red Bull, I must turn in one of these sequences, as they're called. I was lucky enough to fall in with a group of young kayakers who happen to be some of the craziest and best kayakers in the world. As Peter said, they're a bunch of nuts. This is the second largest waterfall ever run, 132 feet. In meters, that's a lot. That's a few of these, basically. And we went back to this waterfall for 5 years in a row. The first year, we did the first descent of this river, and everybody basically rappelled around it or abseiled around it, as they say in Europe. And they thought, no, it probably won't ever go. But there was one guy, this guy, Rafa Ortiz, a Red Bull athlete, that said, someday this will be run. So for every year, we'd go back in October, and we waited for that perfect day. Part of the reason I've always been a Nikon photographer is situations like this. You have to trust your equipment. And there is no take two, no second chance. I can't really be like, "Hey, Rafa, can you go do that again?" I can ask, but he probably won't do it. Again, fell in love with kayaking and just went out and sort of started pushing the envelope, making good images, trying to just sort of round out my portfolio so it wasn't all ski-based. And a lot of these have a specific home in mind. When I go on these expeditions, typically I have a magazine in mind where they're going to go. I also have commercial clients that are looking for images, adventure images, whether it's the jacket company, the kayak company, the paddle company, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm always having a home in mind for these images. This is in Matlaco Falls, which is in the Columbia River Gorge in, I guess that's Washington State. And this beautiful green over here on the left side is something I don't think you're lucky enough to have here in Iceland. It's poison oak, which is this plant which if you touch it, it's itchy, your skin breaks out in a rash, you have blisters. It's basically like death. And I'm very, very allergic. But I wanted to get this shot. And it was very important to me to be able to get to this position and make this. So I got down here. I used gaffer tape around my cuffs. I wore gloves. I wore goggles, taped my pant legs down, and got this shot. And was lucky enough to have a little bit of light come out to make the picture just a hair more interesting. Always looking for new angles, whether it's in high angle or a low angle. Always trying to better my photography. This was on that first descent of the Rio Alsaceca. We actually heard Mexico's kind of a sketchy place. Has anybody been to Mexico? No? Okay. I wouldn't go. We were hearing gunshots in the jungle, and I asked my guide, I said, are we okay? And he said, yeah, just don't cross the river. They're all on the other side. And I was like, oh, I feel a lot better now. So, but the Matlaco Falls, the first descent at Matlaco Falls, Jesse Coombs. This is one of my favorite pictures in my portfolio. There's no Photoshop here, no trickery. This is 100% straight out of the camera. This is one of those moments where you never put your camera away because you never know what's going to happen. We were shooting the waterfalls upstream, and I noticed as I'm walking back to the car, crossing this bridge, that there's these interesting patterns in the water. And these patterns are actually soap bubbles. It's a natural form of soap. Leaves and bark fall in the water. They get broken down. The fatty acids in them break down and they bubble up in the waterfalls. And when it goes to the slack water, it makes these really interesting patterns. So with my photography, almost in every frame that you'll see, I start with the background first. I see this background and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I have to photograph this. How am I going to do it? And lucky enough, there was one of my kayakers was floating down to take out. So what do? I take a test shot, check exposure, check sharpness, and I wait for him to come in. I shoot 3 frames, and this happened to be one of them. One of those serendipitous moments where everything works out as long as you're ready with your camera. Was also lucky enough to be invited along to photograph Rafa Ortiz again, my crazy nut kayaker friend, on the largest waterfall ever run. Palouse Falls in Washington State. And we get there, and we get to the waterfall, and I'm like, oh, cool, this is a massive waterfall. Where's the one you're going to run? He's like, oh, this is it. And I'm like, are you serious? And ironically, being an adventure photographer, I'm pretty afraid of heights. So I look over the edge, and I was like, oh, nope, not even getting close. So I go set up on the cliff, looking back. And we were there for a Red Bull shoot. We had a Cineflex helicopter, which is a helicopter that has a camera mounted on the front. Kind of big production. The helicopter is an hour and a half late. All of a sudden, Rafa disappears. Our talent, our athlete, we're like, uh-oh, did he get cold feet and just take off? Somebody finds him on the other side of the river, asleep next to his kayak. And it was one of those things where I said, really, you're going to take a nap before dropping off of a 189-foot waterfall? And he said, I'm at peace with whatever happens. And as a photographer, I go on these expeditions, and I feel like you need to be a person first. I was the first one to say, you know, if you're not comfortable with this, we can pull up, we can take off, not a big deal, dude. And he said, no, good to go. I never want to push anybody to do something they wouldn't be comfortable doing. On these big shoots, I typically have 3 cameras set up, usually 3 different angles, because, like I said, there is no take 2, no second chance. He's not going to do this again. So I had 3 cameras, all on tripods, actually. And the reason they were all on tripods was because I was pretty much shaking and nervous that I was going to lose a friend, because at 189 feet, there's a good chance he's not going to come back. And I was also worried about missing the shot because I knew I'd lose a friend that way as well, because if I did miss it, he'd never speak to me again. There's a lot of trust involved. If you were the photographer on one of these expeditions, you're trusted to bring back these images. You're the one who's going to be recording this for future generations. So a lot of trust involved. If I don't do my job, I'm not going to get invited back. I asked Rafa what it was like to go off of this waterfall, which is about a 4-second free fall. So 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, boom, you know. And I only got 3 frames, actually, because he's right here. And after that, he was engulfed by water. And this is with a D4S, which shoots 11 frames per second. So he was only up there for a split second. And then he was engulfed by water. He goes under the water, and for 3 minutes, which seemed like eternity, you could hear in the film that was made, everybody on the radio going, come on, Rafa. Come on, Rafa. And finally, Rafa jumps up. He's okay. He pops up, and the rescue kayakers go, and they get him. And it was one of those things where we were just all very relieved. A little known thing in kayaking, if you swim or you get pulled out of your boat, it's mandatory, this is international law, that you drink a beer out of your boot. So not only did he go off of a 189-foot waterfall, but he then drank a beer out of his wet, stinky boot. So this is my typical sort of gear table for going on one of these expeditions. Nikon D4S, Nikon D810, Nikon D750, 24-70, 70-200, 300-2.8, 50-1.4, 28-70, 16mm fisheye, blah, blah, blah. Lots of stuff. You can see it's a boatload of stuff. But sometimes, I too, like many people, like to go on vacation, and I carry small cameras, pocket cameras, point-and-shoot cameras, because as much as I love my DSLRs, it's kind of like a boat anchor at a certain point. But if I miss a picture because I was lazy and didn't take a camera, I will never forget myself. One of the main questions people ask from all sort of levels of photography is, what's the best camera? Everybody's looking for the perfect camera, right? And to me, the best camera is the camera that you carry with you at all times. And carrying a small camera like this, a point and shoot, such as the Coolpix A, which is very small, allows me to go out and produce images. And all these images here that you're going to see in this next section were all taken with point and shoot cameras, all Coolpix cameras. Reflection shots, Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Using off-camera strobes, Red Rocks, Colorado. Using a custom white balance, 10,000 Kelvin, Sunset, Manuel Antonio, Costa Rica. A light painting. Really simple picture. This technique is so easy. You get a tripod, you put your Coolpix on it, you get it framed like you like it, put it on self-timer, push the button, exposure opens, and then you get a flashlight, and you just paint the light in for 15 seconds. F4, ISO 4000 or so, and do a test. If it's not perfect, do it again. Pretty fun stuff. Simple stuff with small cameras. Always looking to make more out of every situation, so a lot of times I'll look to shoot what I call a 3-picture package. I'll use the macro mode, the little green flower on the point-and-shoot camera, as well as shooting a scene setter. And also focusing on the gear, the interesting things that the sport has. This is Dan, who's right up here in the front row, my assistant and friend. And he basically paddled over me a few times with the little waterproof point-and-shoot camera. So just going out and making images in many different situations. This is Big Sur, California, Pfeiffer Beach. It's really fun, and it brings me back to why I really got into photography. When it's gray, I love to shoot monochromatic. I've never been here in January, February. I hear on occasion it's a little bit gray, maybe just a little. Monochromatic, perfect, you know? I'm always looking for these graphic things, leading lines to bring you into the frame. Different things. Just because the weather is bad doesn't mean you can't go out and shoot. Nikon USA asked me to go and do a shoot with a little compact camera called the AW110, a little waterproof point-and-shoot camera. And they said, do you have anything coming up? So I called my nut buddy, Rolf Ortiz, the crazy kayaker, and I said, you got anything going on? He said, yes, I'm going to Mexico, and it's kind of sketchy, but you should be fine. There's some rebels. And I said, okay. I said, what kind of rebels? He said, Zapatistas. I go, okay. So I did my research. I found out that the Zapatistas were not big fans of Americans because in the 1980s, they tried to help the Mexican government basically get rid of them as rebels. So this is one of those days where everything's going perfect. This was the day after my 35th birthday, December 20th. And I take this picture, and I'm just like, wow, this is great. And I turn around, and there's like 20 dudes with machetes, big knives, like this tall. And they're staring at me. They're wearing masks. All I can see is their eyes. I look at my guide. He looks at me. I say, we are so... It's a family audience. I won't say it. And they start yelling at me, Estados Unidos, which means United States, United States. And I'm like, Soy de Canada, I'm from Canada. And they basically were like, we need $10,000, otherwise we're going to, you're with your head. And I'm like, I don't really have $10,000. But through a long series of negotiating, first it was $300, then it was $500, finally $1,000 later, they let me go with all my fingers and toes. And I had the cameras in my pockets, so they didn't take those. And I got to walk away. the irony of the whole situation was I paid them in US dollars. So I'm not sure if they're up on their currency exchange rates right now, but I didn't really laugh at them about that. Big Sur, California, one of my favorite places to photograph. Just absolutely special place. So I've started doing a lot of surfing. I do a lot of research as well on my shoots. This is the City of Arts and Sciences in Valencia, Spain. And this is basically because of doing research, I have this image. I use things like Google Earth. There's millions of pictures on Google Earth. If I go somewhere I haven't been before, I will go on Google Earth and say, wow, I wonder what's around here. So I was in Spain photographing something completely different and saw that just down the road, there's this very cool architectural installation. So I got a cab, went out, made a picture. So through that little bit of research and going out and trying to do something, I made another image for my portfolio. Machu Picchu, Peru, Big Sur again. Having a manual controlled camera, point and shoot, or whatever camera, is very important to me. Being able to shoot long exposures, for instance, this is a 15-second exposure, makes all the difference in the world. As well as being able to, set it up as though it's a pro camera. This is in Venice, Italy. The airport in Chicago. Just putting a camera on the front of the boat. Sometimes I'll give myself an assignment, like I mentioned before. In this case, I wanted to shoot 3 pictures within 60 meters. I was like, okay, I want 3 or 4 pictures. The weather is crap. It's drizzling. What do? I go monochromatic, okay. I'm like, all right, I'm going to go look for a macro shot first. So I find this flower, kind of cool. Start looking for textures, kind of cool. Find some more textures, kind of cool. Things are starting to work. 15-second exposure. And remember, this is with a point-and-shoot camera. Pretty fun stuff. Shoot a panoramic, and all of a sudden, in a day that I would have just been sitting on the couch watching TV, I've produced 4 unique images. Will they sell? I don't know. I don't really care. But it's all about that process of going out and shooting something, producing something, and that's really what got me into photography. It was that instant, like, wow, I can go out and produce something on any given day. Surfing has been my newest passion. Started photographing a lot of big wave surfers and just doing a lot of different types of surfing photography. For instance, I will light surfing using high-speed sync. This was actually lit with pro photo packs using Pocket Wizards. So you can go out and shoot at 25/100th of a second. Then I also use the new B1s, which are amazing lights as well. And shooting long exposure. So one little tip, I shoot surfing or anything snow-related or water-related with a very, very fast shutter speed. This is like 1/3000th of a second or 1/2500th of a second. Or at a very, very long exposure, like 10 to 15 seconds. Nothing in the middle. Hawaii. Off-camera flash. This was actually shot with a fluorescent white balance. So that fluorescent brings that magenta in. And I've got one strobe off camera that allows me to light him properly with a green gel to basically even that out. Brazil. Got up at sunrise, was actually there for another shoot. Had a 70 to 200 with a converter on I think this was a D3S at the time. And I'm seeing these waves coming in. I'm like, oh, I got to shoot these waves. So I shoot this sequence, and I had about 15 frames. This guy dropping into this wave. He pops out. He's like fist bumping. He's like, this is the wave of my life. And I'm like, wow, that was pretty cool. He runs down the beach. We're in Brazil, remember? And he's like yelling at me, and I'm like, oh, I hope this isn't a local thing. I'm not supposed to photograph here or something. And I don't speak any Portuguese. And I assume he was saying, did you get the picture? Did you get the picture? That's the best wave I've ever surfed. And I didn't understand what he was saying, but he just kept speaking faster and louder, figuring that would help. And finally, I figured out that what he wanted was to get my email address so that I could send him a picture. So he ran over, got a pen, and I scribbled my email address on his arm and sent it off to him. But kind of fun stuff. This is actually just near the Glacier Lagoon here, on a day where there's many icebergs, near Vic. As you can see, you're going to see a lot of Iceland pictures here coming up. Glacier Lagoon again, going when the light is good. People often ask me, what is your style of photography? I'd say, well, it's big landscape, little person. I love the landscapes, but I always like to have a person doing something interesting so that we can draw attention to one part in the frame. It's sort of joyful to see somebody look at a picture and be like, oh, that's a cool scenic, and they're like, is that a kayak? Wow. So that's really what I try to inspire in all of the images. Black Sand Beach near Hoof. Little LED in the tent. So pretty simple stuff. You know, I'm just traveling around with a couple cameras and making something, you know, unique on any given day. So December 20th of this last year, the day after my birthday, I should know not to go out the day after my birthday, as the Mexico thing happened day after my birthday. Went to Mavericks in California. This is one of the largest waves in the world. And we get there. It's very ominous. You get to the harbor, and it's dark, and you hear these explosions in the background. It's like a bomb going off. And we get out there, and some of the best surfers in the world are there. Shane Dorian, Garrett McNamara, Sean Dollar, Jamie Mitchell, Mark Matthews. I mean, the top of the top. They're riding these huge surfboards. And it's only because photography, you're in a sense, as a photographer, you're almost like an athlete or a doctor or a surgeon. The more you practice something, the better you get at it. We're on this boat getting thrown around, and I'm still just focused on the task at hand, making these images of these massive waves coming in. I mean, these waves, they've killed many people here over the years. The consequences are dire. This guy had a rough day at the office here. This is actually Sean Dollar. But as you can see, really kind of crazy stuff. And then Jamie Mitchell, here in this frame, after this is what was the end of the day. These surfboards are absolutely massive. They weigh about 12 kilos per surfboard, so they're pretty big and pretty heavy. Right after this picture was taken, our boat captain, was not paying attention, and our boat got hit by a wave, and 3 guys were thrown off the back of the boat, and there was a bunch of guys in the back of the boat that had all their equipment destroyed. Fortunately, no Nikon gear was destroyed in this episode, but there was a couple Canon guys that were very unhappy. I was very fortunate and very honored to be asked by Nikon corporate in Japan to, initially the phone call was, hey, we have a new camera. We can't tell you what it's called. It's going to be amazing. It'll have lots of megapixels. It'll be the sharpest thing you've ever seen. Where would you like to go? And I said, I want to go to Iceland. So we packed up for Iceland, and the first thing we shot was this little time-lapse piece, which I'm going to show you. So those were all shot with a function called internal time-lapse with exposure smoothing. What it does is you put the camera on an automatic mode. I prefer aperture priority. And you set it for the amount of time you'd like the time-lapse to be. And it will automatically change the exposure or ramp the exposure during the time it's taking pictures. And it stitches them all together and spits out this 1080 high-definition video which is kind of fun because time lapses before this were very tedious. You'd shoot 10,000 frames, and then you'd edit 10,000 frames, and then you bring them into a timeline in a video editor, and it would take days and weeks, and I would prefer to be out in the field. So this is something pretty cool. But part of the assignment was to test dynamic range. On one of these shoots, it's not like they just give you a camera and say, just go take pictures of whatever you'd like. I wish they would. But you're testing very specific things. You're testing, to the pixel. You're looking at the 24 millimeter 1.4 lens. How sharp is it at 1.4 with this camera at ISO 400? You're doing all these very specific tests, and you're going out and just making images. But it's one of those things where it's a very controlled environment that you're trying to show all these different things, the tonal quality, the amount of detail on the sensor, and doing what I do. I brought a professional surfer and a professional kayaker because, like I said before, I like to shoot big landscape, little person. So that's my comfort zone. So brought Eric Soderquist, who's been a Hurley surfer for numerous years, and we just started cruising around every day, getting up before sunrise, shooting when the light was good, making some action shots, shooting at very fast shutter speeds to freeze all the action, but also shooting at slow shutter speeds. And one of the things we wanted to see was at ISO 64, which previously cameras really didn't go down to 64, what could we do? Could we get a little bit of motion to show a little bit of, make this image more dynamic? So this is at ISO 64 near Vic, 24 1.4 lens, tack sharp on his eye. With any camera, whether it's Nikon asking me to test a camera or even just a camera that I would purchase, I would go out and I will do all kinds of things. I will test it indoors, outdoors, at night. I will see what it does very well and maybe what it doesn't do so well. So I'm always, as a professional, knowing how it will react in all kinds of situations. Near Hoof, Black Sand Beach. This is one of my favorite areas in Iceland, these moss fields. Every time we go by there, I think it looks like green cotton candy. And of all the pictures I took on this trip, this seems to be the one worldwide that people go, where is that? That's absolutely amazing. And they want to hear the story that I hiked 35 miles over this mountain pass to find this area. And I'm like, no, I just kind of pulled off the road. And then they're kind of disappointed. But it's absolutely breathtaking, that area. Always looking for the detail. And, it was a lot of fun. It was kind of like a three-ring circus. We had one day of good weather where we got all of these sunrise shots. And, I'm thinking, okay, we've got this in the can. We've got this in the bag. And the next day, we go out and we're photographing. We're not photographing yet. We get up at 4:30 in the morning. And we're out the door. And it's dark still. And then it starts raining. And then it starts snowing. And then the snow starts blowing sideways like it does on occasion in Iceland. And I'm standing there out on this point waiting for the light to get up, or if there's any light, just going, this is the most miserable day of my life. What am I doing here? And for 5 minutes, literally 5 minutes, the sun came out, it quit snowing, and we got this image. And that made that whole day and that whole trip worthwhile in my mind, because it's that little bit of perseverance, going out and putting yourself in the elements and making this picture that really is what's special to me about photography. It really all starts with that passion. And then right after this shot, we headed back, and this is what it looked like. So kind of a typical weather day, I guess you could say. What is the saying? If you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes. I also brought a professional kayaker. This is Joel Kowalski. He's Canadian. And I like to start off every project usually with a portrait. And this portrait is, y'all know this waterfall, I'm sure, but done with one speed light, an SB910, off camera. I have set the white balance on the camera itself to tungsten, the little light bulb, which when you do that, it basically adds blue to the image because it thinks you're indoors and there's these warm orange lights, so it's balancing that out. But when you're outside, under available light, it turns everything blue. On the strobe, or the little flash, which is off camera about 3 meters, my assistant's holding it, I have an orange gel, or a full CTO, covering that, so everything that lights is lit correctly. So pretty simple concept. The camera, the flash on the camera, the internal flash, is in the commander mode, so it's firing the flash off camera. Really, really easy. We went to the Glacier Lagoon. We hiked around. We found this waterfall, which he said is good to go. And I said, can you do it a couple times? He said, no way. He said, the water's really cold. I said, okay, you can do it once. And he said, yes, I'll do it once. So to maximize that, I wanted to have a couple cameras. So from that point, that vantage point you just saw, I had an 800 millimeter lens, and I shot all the way across, and I made this image. And simultaneously, there was a camera sitting next to me that I made this image. So again, maximizing that output, because he said, no, I'm not going to do it again, which I don't blame him. I didn't feel bad, but kind of fun stuff. We hiked around looking for, these waterfalls. This is probably my favorite image from the trip. This, to me, epitomizes Iceland. We hiked up to this waterfall. He ran it. We were the only people around, and it was a really special experience. To me, this is Iceland. It's pure. There's not a speck of pollution. You're out there by yourself among friends, and this is one of those special days that will definitely live on in my memory. Same thing here. We used a couple cameras so that we could get multiple images from this waterfall drop. Unfortunately, we didn't get enough of the peak action surfing that they had requested, so we got on a plane and went directly to Hawaii. I was like, oh, bummer, I have to go to Hawaii. So we went back and just continued the process. It was kind of a culture shock to go from here in Iceland, where everybody is so nice, to the North Shore of Hawaii, where they're like, get out of here, Hallie. They're like not very locals only. But we still made the images. These guys are 2 guys I work with. This is Flynn Novak and Daniel Jones, who are great professional surfers, Keone Jones. But yeah, just really kind of fun stuff, rounding out that D810 project. Got home and was lucky enough to have the project extended. They said, hey, we've got a new lens. I said, what is it? They said, we can't tell you. It shows up. It doesn't have anything on it, no numbers or anything. I'm like, okay. It looks like it's a wide-angle lens, but it turns out it was a 20 millimeter 1.8. So what do? I go out, I find some backgrounds. And then, like I said before, in my photography, I start with the background first, and I work forward. Got my friend Eric again, find a good background, find a good model, and go out and just start working through that process. Put yourself in a good situation to succeed by getting up early and shooting when the light is good, or finding good backgrounds. You're going to make better pictures. Eric again, this is near my house, Big Sur, actually Pismo Beach, California. Just going out and having fun. Adding a little bit of flash. This is just one flash off camera at sunset. Really simple stuff. Going monochromatic. A lot of these assignments, the list of things that you're not allowed to photograph is longer than the list of things that you are allowed to photograph. Everybody that's recognizable must have a model release. No tattoos, no piercings, nobody can be holding a beer. Women's upper arms cannot be exposed. It's pages and pages long. But you go out and you try to make the best out of a very limited situation and use props. It's one of those things, lemons into lemonade. Another day where it was very, very dreary and cloudy, so we went ahead and shot monochromatic again. But we wanted to do something a little different, so we shot some steel wool photography. Pretty simple concept. Basically, you put steel wool inside of like an egg whisk, and then you put that whisk on a string, and you use either a battery or a lighter to light the steel wool, and then you spin it around for about 15 seconds at f4, ISO 400, and then at the very end, you just pop a little bit of flash in there to light him up. So this is a 15-second exposure, and then with rear curtain sync, you just put a little bit of flash in at the very end to make something unique, something a little more dynamic. And all these pictures here, the steel wool pictures, were all shot in 30 minutes. So it just shows you with a little bit of a concept, an athlete or a model, you can go out and do something kind of cool. Star Trails, McWay Falls. This is about 380 images stitched together. in a program called Star Stacker. So they're individual shots that then are put together in a computer program so you can shoot digital star trails. These lines going up here, they're actually airplanes that we're going over, which is kind of cool. Passion projects. And this is something that I can't say enough about. Photography for me, it all starts with passion. And to go out and find something that you truly love to photograph, whether that's landscapes or people or your kids or, chess, I don't know, just things that you're really passionate about. And so I go out and I try to do at least once every 6 months to go out and do a project where nobody's paying me. I'm just going out with some friends. Maybe we're camping, and we're just going out and shooting pictures for the sake of shooting pictures. Because to me, that's where I came from. That's where I started. And that's what I want to continue to do. Because as a visual storyteller, you're only as good as your last job with a lot of these companies. And by going out and trying new techniques, trying things that you wouldn't do on an assignment because it's not safe, in a sense, because you want to make sure the client is always happy, you can go out and practice them on your own. In a sense, you're like a handyman. The more things you can do well, the better your pictures will be. This is a image that I shot in Big Sur, and this is the Milky Way. And I used a lot of iPhone applications. I don't use the iPhone particularly for photos, but I do use it for the applications, such as one called Photo Pills, which allows you to figure out when the Milky Way will rise, what the moon cycle is, so that you can do the research and know when a good night to go out and do star photography would be. Black and white. Again, just going out with friends, enjoying yourself, looking for textures, looking for moments, and just working through that process. And if these pictures never sell, I really don't care. I mean, they probably will to somebody down the line, but to me, it's all about that process, that creative freedom. It's allowing me to go out and with my mind, go out and enjoy photography. The new Nikon 80-400 lens is one of my favorites because I can shoot at 400 millimeters handheld, which is pretty cool, and it also fits in a backpack, and it's very small and lightweight. So I will use that a lot for surfing, and it gives it a real sense of immediacy. You can see in the foreground here how it really draws you in and gets you right to that subject. Again, that 80-400. And again, always looking for that closing picture. So I've got one little piece here, another video piece that we did for Red Bull. Kai Lenny, who's one of the top young surfers in the world. We used D750, D810, and an 800 millimeter lens to film most of it. The water shots were all taken with a 70-200 and a D810. So that was Kai Lenny. That was in Maui, Hawaii. And the surf break is called Jaws, or Piahi, as they say locally. Kind of crazy stuff these guys do. That's my presentation. Do we have any questions? Not everybody at once. Okay. Thank you guys so much. Follow your dreams, love photography, and have a good time. Thank you.